I was sitting in the break room at Henderson and Associates, picking at a turkey sandwich while scrolling through my phone when the text that would change everything popped up on my screen. It was from Mom in our family group chat. "Kenneth, please don't come to Emma's wedding this Saturday. The family wants a drama-free celebration and we think it's best if you stay home." My stomach dropped as I watched Emma immediately like the message. Without thinking, I typed back, "Great choice. Then you'll all be free of my monthly payments too." The silence that followed lasted exactly 12 seconds before the chat exploded with frantic messages, panic emojis, and desperate phone calls. What none of them realized was that for 3 years, I had been quietly funding their entire lives while they treated me like the family disappointment. Now they were about to discover exactly what they had just lost. The aftermath of my response was immediate and devastating. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with frantic calls from Mom, Dad, and Emma. I let each one go to voicemail while I pulled up my banking app to show my coworker Jessica exactly what I meant. "Look at this," I said, turning my phone toward her. The monthly transfers were all there in black and white: $1,500 to Mom and Dad for their mortgage, $800 to Emma for her apartment rent, $600 for my brother Jake's college tuition at Ohio State, and another $400 for Grandma's nursing home in Akron. Every month for 36 months straight. Jessica's eyes widened as she scrolled through the endless list of payments. "Kenneth, this is over $3,000 every month. That's like $36,000 a year. Try $42,000. I corrected her, pointing to the additional payments for car repairs, medical bills, and emergency expenses that popped up regularly. And that doesn't include the one-time payments for Dad's heart surgery, Emma's wedding dress, or the down payment I gave them for Jake's dorm room." The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, when Dad had his heart attack and couldn't work construction anymore, I was the one who stepped up. Fresh out of college with my accounting degree, I had just landed my position at Henderson and Associates in Chicago. While my family assumed I was barely scraping by in the expensive city, I was actually making $78,000 a year as a junior accountant with clear potential for rapid advancement. I had grown up poor in Cleveland, watching my parents struggle to make ends meet in our cramped duplex on the east side. Dad worked construction when his back allowed it, and Mom cleaned houses for wealthy families in Shaker Heights. Emma was the star athlete who everyone expected would get a full scholarship somewhere. And Jake was the smart one, destined for college. I was just Kenneth, the middle child, who kept his head down and worked part-time jobs at Target and Pizza Hut to help with family expenses. But I had a secret weapon. I was incredibly good with numbers. While my family saw me as the quiet, unremarkable son, I had been managing our household budget since I was 15. I knew exactly how much we owed, what we spent, and where every dollar needed to go. When I got my first job out of college, I immediately started sending money home without telling anyone how much I actually made. The first payment was just $500 to help with groceries. Then Dad's heart attack happened, and suddenly they needed help with medical bills. When Mom mentioned they might lose the house, I stepped in with the mortgage payments. When Emma started talking about moving out but couldn't afford rent, I covered her apartment. When Jake got accepted to Ohio State but needed help with expenses, I made sure he could attend. Every month, I lived in a modest studio apartment, drove my 10-year-old Honda Civic, and ate packed lunches so I could send most of my paycheck home to Cleveland. My colleagues at the firm assumed I was struggling financially, which was fine by me. I didn't need them to know that I was supporting 5 adults on my single income. My mentor Tom, a senior partner at the firm, had warned me about this exact scenario 6 months ago. "Kenneth, you're one of the most talented accountants I've worked with," he had said during my performance review, "but I've noticed you seem stressed about money and you drive a car that's older than some of our interns. Are you managing your finances properly?" I had laughed it off and told him I was just being cautious with spending. I couldn't explain that I was supporting my entire family without sounding like either a martyr or a fool. Looking back now, I realized Tom had probably figured out more than he let on. The voicemail started piling up as I sat in the break room staring at my phone. Emma's voice was high and panicked. "Kenneth, please call me back. I didn't mean for it to sound like that. We can talk about this." Mom's message was more defensive. "You're being dramatic, honey. We just thought it would be easier for everyone if you skipped this one wedding." But it was Dad's voicemail that really got to me. His voice was rough and tired. "Son, your mother didn't mean anything by that text. You know how she gets when she's planning events. Just call us back, okay? We need to talk about this payment thing you mentioned." I deleted all the messages without responding and spent the rest of my lunch break calculating exactly how much money I had given my family over the past 3 years. The total was staggering $126,000. More than a year and a half of my gross salary sent home to people who had just told me I wasn't welcome at my own sister's wedding. When I returned to my desk, Tom was waiting with a concerned expression. "Everything all right, Kenneth? You looked pretty upset in the break room." I made a decision that would change everything. "Tom, can I be honest with you about something? I think I need some advice." The weekend gave me time to process the 23 voicemails Emma left on my phone, each one more desperate than the last. By Sunday evening, I had learned more about my family's betrayal than I ever wanted to know. Kenneth, please, you have to understand," Emma sobbed in voicemail number 18. "Sarah convinced me that having you at the wedding would cause drama. She said you'd make a scene about what happened between you two, and Marcus's family is already nervous about the whole situation. She offered to pay for the flowers if we could just keep things peaceful. Sarah." My ex-fiancée of 5 years, the woman I had planned to marry, before she decided that Marcus, a wealthy cardiologist from Westlake, was a better option than a struggling accountant from the East Side. The woman who had broken our engagement 3 months before our own planned wedding, claiming she needed space to figure out her life, while secretly dating the man she's now marrying. The pieces started falling into place as I listened to Emma's increasingly frantic messages. Sarah hadn't just broken my heart. She had systematically worked to erase me from my own family's life. According to Emma's tearful confession in voicemail 21, Sarah had been staying in touch with my family ever since our breakup. She sent Christmas cards, remembered birthdays, and even visited Mom when she was in Cleveland for medical conferences. "She's been so sweet to us, Kenneth," Emma explained through her tears. "She always asks about you and says she hopes you're doing well. When I told her about the wedding, she seemed so excited to reconnect with everyone. She said it would be a beautiful celebration of new beginnings." What Emma didn't say, but what I pieced together from her rambling messages, was that Sarah's presence at the wedding wasn't just about reconnecting with my family. She was using my sister's wedding as a way to show off her new life, her new fiancé, and her escape from the mistake of almost marrying someone like me. I spent Saturday morning doing something I hadn't done in 3 years. I looked up Sarah's social media profiles. What I found made my stomach turn. She was living in a sprawling house in Westlake, driving a brand new BMW and posting photos from expensive vacations to Europe and the Caribbean. Her engagement ring was easily worth more than I made in 3 months. But what really hurt was seeing photos of her with my family. There she was at Emma's birthday party last year, smiling next to my mother. There was another photo from Jake's graduation party with Sarah's arm around my father. She had been maintaining relationships with my family while completely cutting me out of her life. The final piece of the puzzle came in Jake's text message Sunday afternoon. Unlike the rest of my family, Jake had always been direct with me even when the truth was uncomfortable. "Kenneth, I'm really sorry about the wedding thing. Mom and Dad made Emma choose between you and Sarah, and Emma chose Sarah because she offered to pay for the flowers. The whole thing is messed up. Also, we're all freaking out about the money thing you mentioned. Can we talk?" I called Jake immediately. He was 21, starting his senior year at Ohio State and studying engineering. Unlike Emma, who had always been dramatic, or my parents who had always been proud, Jake had inherited my practical nature. "The truth is, Kenneth, we all knew you were supporting us, but nobody wanted to talk about how much Jake admitted when I reached him at his dorm. Mom keeps saying you're doing fine in Chicago, that you must be making good money to help us out. Dad just says you're being a good son. But Emma and I know you're living in some tiny apartment and driving that old car. How did you know that? Because Emma drove up to visit you last year, remember? She came back talking about how you barely had any furniture and how your refrigerator was basically empty, except for leftovers and energy drinks. She was worried about you, but Mom said you were just being frugal. The conversation with Jake revealed something else that made my blood boil. My family hadn't just accepted my financial support. They had been bragging about their improved lifestyle to friends and neighbors. Dad had been telling people that his successful accountant son was helping them invest in their future. Mom had been posting on Facebook about how grateful she was for her generous children, who made it possible for her to stay home and care for Dad. None of them had ever publicly acknowledged that their improved circumstances were entirely due to my monthly payments. Instead, they had created a narrative where I was doing well enough to help out, and they were grateful recipients of my success, rather than completely dependent on my sacrifice. "There's something else you need to know," Jake said quietly. "About Sarah and Marcus. Emma told me that Marcus is actually the lawyer who helped Dad and Emma set up some business paperwork recently. Sarah connected them when Dad started talking about maybe starting his own construction company after he recovered from the heart attack. My blood ran cold. What kind of business paperwork? I don't know exactly. Dad's been really secretive about it. He says it's going to be a surprise announcement at Emma's wedding reception. Something about finally being able to provide for the family again instead of depending on you." I hung up the phone with a sick feeling in my stomach. Dad's heart attack recovery had been complete for months. His doctor had cleared him for light construction work 6 months ago. Yet the mortgage payments, the car payments, and all the other support had continued without any mention of him returning to work. I spent Sunday night going through 3 years of bank statements with the meticulousness that had made me successful in my accounting career. What I found was a pattern of financial dependency that had grown more extensive and sophisticated over time. The initial payments for medical bills and temporary support had evolved into a comprehensive funding system for my family's entire lifestyle. More disturbing was the timing of certain payments. Large transfers had been made right before family gatherings or holidays, almost as if my financial support was being used to ensure I remained welcome at family events. The money wasn't just covering necessities. It was funding a lifestyle that made my family appear successful and stable to their community. By Monday morning, I had made a decision that would have seemed impossible a week earlier. I was going to find out exactly what my family had been doing with my money, and I was going to discover the truth about this mysterious business venture that Dad planned to announce at Emma's wedding. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years and drove to Cleveland. My childhood friend Danny Kowalski was waiting for me at Murphy's Tavern on Fleet Avenue, the same dive bar where we used to sneak beers when we were 17. Danny had stayed in Cleveland after high school, working construction with his father's company, and he knew everything that happened in our old neighborhood. "Kenneth, man, I'm really glad you called," Danny said, as I slid into the booth across from him. "I've been wanting to talk to someone about your family situation for months, but I didn't know how to bring it up." Danny had been my closest friend growing up, the kind of guy who knew all my family's business because our mothers had been friends since elementary school. If anyone would know what was really happening with my father's mysterious business venture, it would be Danny. "Tell me what you've heard," I said, ordering a beer I probably shouldn't have been drinking at 2 p.m. on a Monday. Danny looked uncomfortable. "Okay, but you're not going to like this. Your dad's been telling everyone in the neighborhood that he and Jake are starting a construction company together. Big plans, new equipment contracts lined up. He's been bragging about how successful it's going to be. Jake's still in college." That's what I thought too. "But your dad's been saying Jake is going to graduate this spring and come back to Cleveland to run the business side while your dad handles the construction. They've bought trucks, tools, even rented a small office space over on Lorraine Avenue." My stomach sank. "Danny, my dad hasn't worked a real job since his heart attack. I've been paying his bills for 3 years. That's the thing, Kenneth. About 6 months ago, your dad started working again. Not full-time, but he's been doing small renovation jobs for people in the neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson hired him to redo her kitchen. The Kowalskis next door had him build a new deck. He seems fine health-wise. 6 months ago. That was around the time I had asked Dad how he was feeling and whether he thought he might be able to return to work soon. He had told me the doctor wanted him to take it slow, maybe try working part-time in another year or so. He had specifically asked me not to reduce the monthly payments because he was still building back his strength. Here's where it gets weird, Danny continued. Your dad's been telling everyone that you're his business partner, like his silent partner who's helping fund the startup costs. He says you're doing so well in Chicago that you wanted to invest in a family business. The beer turned sour in my mouth. What kind of startup costs? From what I've heard, they've spent serious money. New pickup truck, professional tools, advertising, office rent. Your dad estimates they've invested about $50,000 so far. $50,000. I quickly calculated my payments to my family over the past 6 months, $18,000, in regular monthly transfers plus additional payments for Jake's textbooks, Emma's car repair, and what Dad had described as unexpected medical expenses. Danny, has anyone actually seen paperwork for this business, like official documents? Funny you should ask. My dad was talking to your dad about maybe collaborating on some bigger jobs, and your dad mentioned that they had all the legal stuff handled. He said Jake's girlfriend's family had connections to help them set everything up properly. Jake's girlfriend. I had met Melissa twice when Jake brought her home for Christmas. She was nice enough studying pre-law at Ohio State. But what Danny had just said made me realize something I should have noticed months ago. My family had been making financial and legal decisions without ever consulting me, despite using my money to fund those decisions. There's one more thing, Danny said, lowering his voice. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but my mom heard from Mrs. Patterson that your family's been saying you're doing really well for yourself in Chicago. Like really well. Your mom told her you're making over $100,000 a year and that you bought some expensive condo downtown. I almost laughed. I was making $78,000 a year and living in a studio apartment that cost $1,800 a month. After sending money home to my family, I had maybe $600 left each month for food, transportation, and any kind of personal expenses. I hadn't bought new clothes in 2 years, and my idea of entertainment was watching Netflix on my laptop. But my family had created a completely different narrative for our neighbors and friends. In their version of the story, I was the successful son who had made it big in the city and was generously sharing my wealth with my grateful family. They weren't dependents surviving on my financial support, they were beneficiaries of my success who were using my investment to build their own business empire. Danny, I need to ask you a huge favor, I said. Can you find out more about this business? Like where exactly they're getting legal advice? What kind of paperwork they've filed? Whether my name is on anything official? I can ask around. My cousin works at the courthouse downtown. She might be able to look up business registrations or corporation filings. I drove home to Chicago that evening with a sick feeling that went far beyond betrayal. My family hadn't just lied to me about Dad's recovery and their financial situation. They had used my money to start a business, created a fake narrative about my success to justify their spending, and somehow involved Jake in a post-graduation plan that would tie him to Cleveland instead of letting him pursue his engineering career. But the detail that kept bothering me the most was Jake's girlfriend's family having connections to help with legal paperwork. Melissa's last name was Foster, and she had mentioned her father was involved in business development somehow. I spent Tuesday morning researching the Foster family in Columbus and discovered something that made my blood run cold. Melissa's uncle was Marcus Foster, a corporate attorney specializing in small business formation and partnership agreements. Marcus Foster, Sarah's fiancé, the cardiologist she had left me for, was apparently also helping my family establish a business using my money without my knowledge or consent. I called Tom and asked for another sick day. Then I called the best lawyer I knew. Patricia Williams had been my law school roommate's sister, someone I had met briefly at a few parties but hadn't spoken to in years. She was now a partner at Williams & Associates, specializing in family financial disputes and fraud cases. When I called her office Wednesday morning and explained my situation, she agreed to see me immediately. "Kenneth, I'm going to ask you some questions that might be uncomfortable," Patricia said as we sat in her downtown Chicago office. "But I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here." For the next 2 hours, I walked Patricia through 3 years of financial records, family communications, and recent discoveries about my family's business venture. She took notes continuously and asked for documentation of every claim I made. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said when I finished. "You've been sending your family approximately $3,000 monthly for 36 months, totaling over $100,000. Your father has been medically cleared to work for at least 6 months but hasn't informed you. Your family has started a business using your money without your knowledge or consent. And the attorney helping them establish this business is engaged to your ex-fiancé." "That's correct." Patricia was quiet for several minutes, reviewing documents and making calculations. When she looked up, her expression was serious. "Kenneth, I need to show you something that's going to be very difficult to hear." She turned her computer screen toward me. On it was a business registration form for Matthews Family Construction, LLC, filed with the state of Ohio 4 months earlier. The registered owners were listed as Robert Matthews, my father, and Jacob Matthews, my brother Jake. The business address was the office space Danny had mentioned on Lorraine Avenue. "How did you get this?" "Public records. Any business registration in Ohio is available through the Secretary of State's website. But this is where it gets complicated." She clicked to another document, a loan application for $50,000 filed with First National Bank of Cleveland. The application listed the business as collateral, but it also included a personal guarantee section. My name was listed as a guarantor for the loan with my Chicago address and employment information. "I never signed this." "I know, look at the signature." The signature was clearly forged. It resembled my handwriting but was obviously not written by me. Worse, the employment information was accurate down to my exact salary and start date at Henderson & Associates. "Patricia, how would they have gotten my employment information?" "That's what we need to find out. But Kenneth, there's more." She showed me a series of additional documents, a business partnership agreement listing me as a silent partner, with a 30% stake in Matthews Family Construction Equipment purchase agreements with my forged signature, and even a commercial insurance policy with me listed as a co-owner. "This is systematic fraud," Patricia said matter-of-factly. "Your family has legally bound you to a business you never agreed to join, using forged signatures and stolen personal information. You're financially responsible for business debts you didn't incur, and you're legally obligated to partnerships you never consented to." The room felt like it was spinning. "How much money are we talking about?" "Based on these documents, you're potentially liable for approximately $80,000 in business-related debt, plus ongoing obligations for loan payments insurance and tax responsibilities." I thought about my conversation with Jake, his mention of Marcus helping with legal paperwork, and the timing of everything. Patricia Sarah's fiancé is Marcus Foster. He's a corporate attorney. Is there any way he would have access to the kind of personal information they used for these documents? Patricia's expression darkened. If Marcus Foster provided legal advice for this business formation, and if he knew this information was being used to forge your signature, then he's committed serious ethical violations that could cost him his license to practice law. She made some phone calls while I sat in her office trying to process the magnitude of what my family had done. They hadn't just taken my money, they had stolen my identity, forged my signature, and created legal obligations that could financially ruin me. When Patricia finished her calls, she had more bad news. "Kenneth, I spoke with a contact at First National Bank. The $50,000 loan was approved based partially on your income and credit score. The bank considered you a low-risk guarantor because of your employment history, and the fact that you've been making consistent payments to your family for years. They used my financial support as evidence that I would cover their business debts. Exactly. Your family's financial stability, which depends entirely on your monthly payments, was used to convince the bank that you were a reliable guarantor for their business loan. The betrayal was so complete and calculated that I felt physically sick. My family had not only used my money to fund their business, they had used my financial responsibility toward them as proof that I would cover their business failures. There's something else, Patricia continued. The timing of these documents coincides perfectly with your sister's wedding planning. Most of this paperwork was filed between February and April, right when Emma would have been making major wedding decisions. You think the wedding exclusion was related to this? I think your family needed you out of town and distracted while they finalized these arrangements. If you had been involved in wedding planning, you might have learned about the business earlier. If you had attended family gatherings where they discussed their plans, you might have asked questions they couldn't answer. Patricia recommended immediate legal action to protect my assets and challenge the fraudulent documents, but she also made another suggestion that would change everything. Kenneth, your sister's wedding is this Saturday. Based on what you've told me about the timing and the people involved, I suspect the wedding reception is when your family plans to announce their business success publicly. They've created this narrative about your partnership and their bright future, and they need a public forum to make it seem legitimate. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we attend the wedding, not to cause drama, but to protect your interests. If your family makes public statements about your business partnership, we need to be there to witness it. And if Marcus Foster is there, we need to confirm his involvement in these fraudulent documents. I stared at Patricia, processing the implications of what she was proposing. My family had excluded me from the wedding to protect their lies. Showing up uninvited with my attorney would expose everything they had been trying to hide. They told me not to come because they wanted a drama-free wedding. Kenneth, the drama isn't your presence. The drama is the fraud they've committed. They're afraid of you being there because they're afraid of the truth coming out. I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. Patricia, would you be willing to attend a wedding with me this Saturday? I thought you'd never ask. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical November weather in Cleveland. I had driven down from Chicago Friday evening and spent the night in a hotel near the airport, partly to avoid any chance encounters with my family, and partly because I needed time to prepare mentally for what was about to happen. Patricia had flown in from Chicago that morning, bringing a briefcase full of legal documents and a small recording device that she assured me was perfectly legal in Ohio as long as one-party me consented to the recording. Remember, Kenneth, our goal is to observe and document, she reminded me as we drove toward the suburban wedding venue in Westlake. We're not here to disrupt Emma's wedding. We're here to protect your interests and gather evidence. The venue was a restored farmhouse, a bang with gardens that probably looked beautiful in spring and summer, but seemed stark and cold under the November sky. Cars were already filling the gravel parking lot my father's pickup truck, which I now knew I had helped purchase Emma's Honda Civic, which I definitely had purchased, and several vehicles I didn't recognize, presumably belonging to the groom's family and friends. As we walked toward the entrance, I spotted Sarah immediately. She was standing near the bride's dressing area wearing a deep green dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her engagement ring catching the light from the windows. She was laughing at something Emma was saying, looking perfectly comfortable and at home with my family. "Is that her?" Patricia asked quietly. "That's her. And the tall man in the expensive suit talking to your parents." I followed Patricia's gaze and saw him, Marcus Foster, even more impressive in person than in the social media photos. He was shaking hands with my father and seemed to be deep in conversation with both my parents. They all looked very comfortable together, like old family friends. The ceremony setup was smaller than I expected, maybe 40 guests total. Emma had always talked about wanting a big wedding, but apparently budget constraints or rather my budget constraints, had forced a more intimate celebration. We slipped into seats in the back row, attracting a few curious glances, but no immediate recognition. I had been absent from enough family events in the past year that many of the guests probably didn't remember exactly what I looked like. The wedding proceeded normally for about 20 minutes. Emma looked beautiful in a dress I had helped pay for, walking down an aisle decorated with flowers Sarah had funded. The groom David seemed like a nice enough guy, though I barely knew him, since I hadn't been invited to any of the engagement celebrations. Then came the moment that would change everything. The officiant, a middle-aged pastor I didn't recognize, reached the traditional part of the ceremony. If anyone present knows of any reason why this couple should not be joined in marriage, speak now, or forever. Hold your peace. It was meant to be a rhetorical pause, the kind of moment that passes quietly in every wedding. But as I sat there watching my family celebrate without me watching Sarah smile triumphantly at my exclusion and thinking about the months of lies and financial fraud that had led to this moment, I realized I couldn't stay silent. I stood up. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the small venue. "But I have something important that this family needs to hear." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Emma's face went white. My mother gasped audibly. My father started to stand up, his face already turning red with anger. Sarah looked like she had seen a ghost. But Marcus Foster's reaction was the most telling. He immediately reached for his phone and took a step toward the exit, like a man preparing to run. "Kenneth, what are you doing here?" My father demanded, his voice loud enough that several guests turned around. "I'm here because I just discovered that my family has been committing fraud, using my name and my money," I said calmly. "And I think everyone here, especially David's family, should know what kind of people they're about to become related to." Patricia stepped forward, introducing herself and producing her business card. "I'm Kenneth's attorney. We're here to address some serious legal issues that have come to our attention." The venue erupted in confused murmurs. David looked completely lost, still standing at the altar holding Emma's hands. Emma was crying, but I couldn't tell if it was from embarrassment or genuine remorse. "Marcus Foster." Patricia called out, her voice professional but firm. "As an officer of the court, I need to speak with you about your involvement in the fraudulent business documents filed for Matthews Family Construction, LLC. Marcus had been slowly edging toward the door, but when Patricia called him out by name, he stopped. Sarah grabbed his arm, and I could see them having a heated, whispered conversation. "Kenneth, you're ruining Emma's wedding," my mother said, tears streaming down her face. "Can't this wait until after the ceremony?" "No, Mom, it can't wait. Because according to the documents Patricia found, Dad and Jake plan to announce their new business partnership with me during the reception. Except I'm not their business partner. I never agreed to any business partnership, and the signatures on all their legal documents are forged." The accusations hung in the air like a bomb that had just gone off. David's parents, who I didn't recognize, looked horrified. Several guests were already pulling out their phones to record what was happening. Emma finally found her voice. "Kenneth, I know you're upset about the wedding invitation, but this isn't the time or place. Emma, they used my money to start a business without my permission. They forged my signature on loan documents. They've legally bound me to debts I never agreed to. And they plan to announce all of this publicly today using your wedding as their platform." I turned to address the crowd. "Everyone here thinks my family has been doing well lately. Nice truck office space, talking about expanding their business. What you don't know is that for 3 years, I've been sending them over $3,000 every month to cover their basic living expenses. Dad hasn't been working. The business startup money came from me. And when they needed legal help to commit fraud, Sarah's fiancé provided it." The silence that followed was deafening. Then my father exploded. "You ungrateful son of a bitch," he yelled, advancing toward me. We raised you. We supported you. And this is how you repay us, by ruining your sister's wedding with lies. Dad, they're not lies. Patricia has all the documentation. Bank records, forged signatures, fraudulent loan applications. You've committed multiple felonies. That's when Marcus made his fatal mistake. Instead of staying quiet and waiting to speak with an attorney, he tried to defend himself. Kenneth, there's been a misunderstanding, he called out, his voice shaky. The business documents were prepared at your family's request, and they assured me they had your consent for everything. Patricia smiled grimly. Mr. Foster, are you saying you prepared legal documents without verifying the signatures of all parties involved? Because that would be a serious violation of legal ethics. Marcus's face went pale as he realized his mistake. By trying to defend himself, he had just admitted to preparing documents without proper verification, which was exactly the kind of professional misconduct that could cost him his law license. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm harder and whispered something urgent in his ear. He looked around the room desperately, like a man watching his career disintegrate in real time. Marcus, don't say anything else, Sarah hissed loud enough for people nearby to hear. But the damage was done. In less than 10 minutes, I had exposed years of financial fraud, destroyed Marcus's professional reputation, and turned Emma's drama-free wedding into the most dramatic event my family had ever experienced. The officiant, who had been standing frozen at the front of the venue, finally found his voice. Perhaps we should postpone the ceremony until these matters can be resolved privately. Emma burst into sobs. David looked around helplessly, probably wondering how he had ended up in the middle of a family financial crime drama. And my parents stood there looking like people whose entire world had just collapsed. Which I realized with grim satisfaction it had. The aftermath of my wedding interruption unfolded faster than anyone could have anticipated. Within minutes of Marcus's admission about the business documents, Patricia was on the phone with local law enforcement, and I was watching my family's carefully constructed lies crumble in real time. Kenneth, you've destroyed everything. My mother sobbed as guests began filing out of the venue in confused clusters. Was this really worth ruining your sister's wedding? Before I could answer, Patricia ended her phone call and approached the crowd that had gathered around us. Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, I need to inform you that I've contacted the Franklin County District Attorney's Office regarding the fraudulent documents filed in your son's name. Detective Rodriguez is on his way to take statements. My father's anger was replaced by panic so quickly it was almost comical. Detective, this is a family matter. We can work this out ourselves. Mr. Matthews' identity theft and signature forgery are felonies in Ohio. This stopped being a family matter when you used Kenneth's personal information to obtain loans and create legal obligations he never consented to. Emma was still crying, but now she was looking at me with something that might have been understanding. Kenneth, I didn't know about the business stuff. I swear I didn't know. But you knew Sarah was paying for your flowers in exchange for excluding me from the wedding. Emma nodded miserably. She said it would be easier for everyone. She said you'd be uncomfortable seeing her with Marcus and that it might cause problems. I thought I was doing everyone a favor. David, who had been standing silently through all of this, finally spoke up. Emma, did you know about Kenneth supporting your family financially? The question hung in the air because, of course, she did know. They all knew. Answer him, Emma, I said quietly. Tell David how you've been able to afford your apartment, your car payments, and this wedding. Emma's face crumpled as the full scope of her situation became clear. Not only had her wedding been destroyed, but her fiancé was learning that her entire lifestyle had been funded by money she had helped her family steal from her brother. That's when Jake appeared, apparently having been called by someone at the wedding. He looked around at the chaos and immediately understood what had happened. Kenneth, I tried to call you yesterday, Jake said, approaching me carefully. I found out about the business documents. I never signed anything. Dad forged my signature too. This was a development Patricia and I hadn't expected. Jake, are you saying you're not actually a partner in Matthew's family construction? I'm saying I didn't know anything about Matthew's family construction until 2 weeks ago. Dad told me it was going to be a surprise announcement at Emma's wedding, that he had set up a business for us to run together after I graduate. When I asked to see the paperwork, he said everything was handled and I didn't need to worry about the details. Patricia was taking notes rapidly. So both Kenneth and Jacob had their signatures forged on these documents. Jake, what about the $50,000 they borrowed? I asked. Jake looked confused. What $50,000, Kenneth? All I know is that Dad's been telling everyone he's starting a construction business with family money. I assumed he meant the money you've been sending. The picture was becoming even clearer and more disturbing. My father had not only forged my signature to establish a business, he had also forged Jake's signature to make him a partner in a venture Jake knew nothing about. Dad had been planning to present Jake with a surprise business partnership that would legally bind him to debts and obligations he had never agreed to. That's when Detective Rodriguez arrived along with an officer I didn't recognize. The venue manager, who had been watching our family drama unfold in his establishment, looked relieved to see law enforcement. I'm going to need to speak with everyone involved, Detective Rodriguez announced. Let's start with Mr. Kenneth Matthews and his attorney. The next 2 hours were a blur of statements, document reviews, and increasingly panicked phone calls from my parents. Patricia had brought copies of all the fraudulent documents, and Detective Rodriguez confirmed what we already suspected: multiple felonies had been committed. But the real revelation came when Detective Rodriguez ran a background check on Marcus Foster. Mr. Foster, it appears you've had some previous issues with document irregularities, the detective said, consulting his notes. 2 complaints filed with the Ohio State Bar in the past 18 months regarding client signatures and notarization procedures. Marcus went white. Sarah, who had been standing next to him through the entire investigation, took a step away. Mr. Foster, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and professional misconduct. Detective Rodriguez continued. You have the right to remain attorney. As the handcuffs went on, Marcus Sarah's carefully constructed new life began falling apart. The wealthy cardiologist she had left me for was being arrested for helping my family commit fraud. Her fairy tale wedding upgrade was turning into a legal nightmare. Kenneth, please, Sarah said, approaching me as Marcus was being led away. I didn't know about the business documents. I just wanted to avoid drama at the wedding. Sarah, you connected my family with a corrupt lawyer who helped them steal my money and forge my signature. Whether you knew the specific details or not, you're part of this. The venue manager approached Patricia and me as the police were finishing their initial investigation. I'm going to need you all to leave, he said apologetically. We have another event this evening. As we walked out of the venue, I realized that somewhere in the chaos, Emma's wedding had officially ended without a ceremony. David was nowhere to be seen, and Emma was sitting in her father's truck, still in her wedding dress, crying. But the final twist came as Patricia and I were getting into our car. Kenneth. It was Danny Kowalski jogging across the parking lot toward us. Man, I heard what happened. I drove over as soon as Jake called me. Danny, what are you doing here? I brought something you need to see. He handed me a manila envelope. My cousin at the courthouse did some digging yesterday. It's about the business loans and the collateral. I opened the envelope and found photocopies of additional loan documents I hadn't seen before. According to the paperwork, Matthew's Family Construction had used my monthly payments to my family as proof of income for not just the $50,000 loan, but for an additional $30,000 in equipment financing. Kenneth, they didn't just forge your signature, Danny said. They used 3 years of bank records showing your payments to them as evidence that you were already financially invested in their business. The bank treated your monthly support as proof that you were a committed business partner. $80,000 in fraudulent loans, all backed by my forged signature and justified by my own financial generosity toward my family. I looked back at the venue where my parents were still dealing with police questions, and Emma was still crying in her ruined wedding dress. Patricia, how long does it usually take to recover money in cases like this? It depends on how much they've already spent and what assets they actually have, she said. But Kenneth, I've already initiated freezing orders on all accounts connected to the business. As of an hour ago, your family can't access any of the loan money or business accounts. As we drove away from the wedding that never happened, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years: complete control over my own financial life. My family's drama-free wedding had turned into the most dramatic day of their lives. And for the first time since Dad's heart attack, they were going to have to face their problems without my money to solve them. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment in Lincoln Park, a spacious one-bedroom with actual furniture and a refrigerator that contained more than just leftovers and energy drinks. The view from my living room window included a small park where families played with their children and couples walked their dogs, a reminder that healthy relationships actually existed. The legal proceedings had moved faster than anyone expected. Marcus Foster had lost his license to practice law and been sentenced to 18 months in prison for fraud and conspiracy. Sarah's engagement had ended 2 weeks after the wedding debacle, when Marcus's legal troubles made headlines in Cleveland's legal community. The last I heard, she was back to working as a nurse and living in a modest apartment near the hospital. My family's situation had been more complicated. Dad and Mom were both facing criminal charges, though Patricia had negotiated plea agreements that would likely result in probation and restitution, rather than jail time. The business assets had been seized and liquidated, recovering about $30,000 of the $80,000 they had stolen. Jake had surprised everyone by handling the situation with remarkable maturity. Once he understood the full scope of what had happened, he had cooperated completely with the investigation and had even testified against Dad's attempts to minimize his role in the fraud. More importantly, Jake had used the crisis as motivation to graduate early and find his own internship in Columbus completely independent of our parents' plans for his future. I spent my whole life thinking Dad was this honorable guy who just had bad luck. Jake told me during one of our weekly phone calls. Finding out he was willing to destroy your life and mine to avoid getting a real job was the wake-up call I needed. Emma's recovery had been slower and more painful. Her wedding to David had been postponed indefinitely, partly because of the legal chaos, and partly because David needed time to process being engaged to someone whose entire lifestyle had been funded by fraud. They were in couples counseling, trying to rebuild their relationship on honest foundations. I keep thinking about all the times I complained that you weren't doing enough for the family, Emma had told me during our first conversation after the arrests. I was living in an apartment you paid for, driving a car you bought, planning a wedding you funded, and I still thought you weren't supportive enough because you missed some family dinners. Emma was now working 2 jobs and living with roommates, experiencing financial independence for the first time in her adult life. It was hard for her, but she was learning skills she should have developed years earlier. My parents had been the most resistant to accepting responsibility for what they had done. Even after pleading guilty to fraud charges, Mom continued to insist that they had always planned to pay me back and that I was overreacting to what she called a family misunderstanding. Dad's response had been more telling. Once the business collapsed and the legal bills started mounting, he had finally returned to construction work, taking a job with Danny's father's company. At 62 years old, he was doing the same physical labor he had done 30 years earlier, the difference being that now he had to do it with a criminal record and damaged credit. The hardest part isn't the money, I had told Patricia during one of our meetings. It's realizing that my family was never grateful for my help. They felt entitled to it. Patricia, who had become more than just my attorney over the past 6 months, understood the emotional complexity of the situation better than anyone. We had started dating 2 months after the wedding disaster, building a relationship based on the kind of honesty and transparency that had been completely absent from my family relationships. Your family created a narrative where your success was partly theirs and your money was partly theirs, Patricia had explained. When you challenged that narrative, they saw it as betrayal rather than boundary setting. The financial recovery had been significant. Beyond the $30,000 recovered from the business assets, the court had ordered my parents to repay the remaining $50,000 over 5 years with interest. Additionally, Patricia had helped me recover most of the money I had sent them over the past year by proving that the payments had been made under fraudulent pretenses. More importantly, I had learned to recognize the difference between helping family and enabling family dysfunction. With the money I was no longer sending to Cleveland, I had been able to establish an emergency fund contribute properly to my retirement account and actually enjoy some of the success I had worked so hard to achieve. I had also started volunteering with a financial literacy program at the Chicago Public Library, helping people understand budgeting, debt management, and family financial boundaries. There was something deeply satisfying about teaching people the skills I had learned through painful experience. The most unexpected outcome of the entire situation had been my relationship with Tom, my mentor at Henderson and Associates. When I had finally explained what had been happening with my family finances, Tom had recommended me for a promotion I hadn't even known was available. Kenneth, the analytical skills and attention to detail you demonstrated in uncovering your family's fraud are exactly what we need in our forensic accounting division, Tom had told me. You'd be investigating financial crimes professionally instead of just experiencing them personally. The promotion had come with a $20,000 salary increase, moving me into a position where I was actually building career capital instead of just sending my income to Cleveland. For the first time since college, I was living within my means and planning for my own future. But perhaps the most significant change had been my relationship with authentic family connections. Patricia's family had welcomed me into their Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations, showing me what healthy family relationships looked like. Her parents asked about my work, remembered details about my life, and never once suggested that my value to them was measured by my ability to solve their financial problems. Real family supports each other, Patricia's mother had told me during Thanksgiving dinner. They don't exploit each other. As I sat in my apartment that Saturday evening looking at photos from Patricia's birthday celebration the night before, I realized that the text message from my mother 6 months ago had actually been a gift. By telling me not to come to Emma's wedding, my family had accidentally freed me from years of financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Kenneth, I got the engineering internship with the county, starting Monday. Thank you for showing me what it looks like to build your own life instead of depending on other people to fund it. I smiled and typed back, proud of you, little brother. You're going to do great. Then I put my phone away and went to join Patricia on the couch, where she was reading case files for her Monday court appearances. We had dinner plans with her colleagues, real friends who valued us for who we were, rather than what we could provide financially. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to family gatherings, career advancement, and financial planning that benefited my own future, rather than subsidizing other people's irresponsibility. The wedding I wasn't invited to had been the beginning of the life I was always meant to live. If you've ever found yourself supporting family members financially, I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments. Have you ever set boundaries with family about money? How did you handle it when people you loved were taking advantage of your generosity? Please like this story. If you believe family relationships should be built on mutual respect rather than financial dependency, subscribe for more stories about overcoming family manipulation. And share this with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect your own financial future. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you recognize your own worth in your family relationships. Remember, real love doesn't come with a monthly payment plan.